Hi guys, welcome to the fourth video for Module 7. In this video we're going to implement the double component picker. This one, the one that has the types of bread and types of sandwich meat in a single picker, and we're going to go on and implement the dependent component picker where the first component are state names and the second component is zip codes, and we're only going to display the zip codes in the second component that are valid for the particular state. We're actually going to have to load that data from a plist, a form of persistent storage. Let's go ahead and do the double component picker. At this point, it should be, you should sort of be getting used to the drill. We'll add a button, and let's center that. I'm going to add constraints that center that everywhere. Let's center that in both horizontally and vertically. And we'll just constrain this button here to the top at the distance that it is. And we'll center it vertically, or center it horizontally as well. And let's add a picker. And we'll center it on the sides and the bottom for its constraints. And we will specify that the view controller is going to be its data source and delegate. So we'll control drag up to the view controller icon and select data source. Do it again and select delegate. And the only thing left to do here, let's go to the attributes inspector. This picker is going to have two components. Actually, we'll do that in code. Yeah, so let's go on to our storyboard and get to work on the double component picker. So that's in the double view controller. The first thing, of course, we're going to need to do is make it implement the data source and delegate. So we'll specify the UI picker view delegate and UI picker view data source classes here. And actually, we still need the storyboard because we've got to set up our outlet and action method. So we'll get the storyboard up and the assistant editor. Hopefully it'll pull up, no, just pulled up the single view controller. So let's get the right class. And somehow we've got two buttons here. I'm going to get rid of one of those. And let's put an action method for that button in. We'll call it on button pressed, just like we did in the previous example. So this is an action for the button, and it's going to be called on button pressed. And let's put an outlet for our picker. And we'll call it double picker in this case. And make sure I use that name correctly, even if it's not the name that the book's code uses. And we've got those connected up. So I think we're done with the storyboard. And let's go back to our class, get rid of our assistant editor, start putting stuff in. And we're just going to use arrays for the data source, not the data, for the data, not the data source. The data source is a class. The data are just the arrays of things. So let's pull up that class and grab that data. There are also a couple variables here that implement the double component part of the picker. So we're going to have two components called filling component and bread component. The filling types are this array, the bread types are this array. While we're at it, let's now get the data source and delegate code and talk about it, and then we'll go back and get our action method. So we'll copy in that stuff. Number of components are 2 now, we'll return we notice there's a different number of bread types and filling types. If you look up here, bread types, there are just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whereas for filling types there are 7. So we'll return the count attribute of each of those arrays depending on which component we're queried for. So again, the purpose of the picker data source methods are to tell iOS, when it displays the picker, how many components there are and how many rows there are in each of those components. So it knows the data source tells iOS the sort of dimensions of the picker. Then the delegate will tell how to display a particular row. And based on the component, again, we'll just return a bread type or a filling type depending on what is asked for by the arguments here. Or we get a row number and a component number. So that's the data source and delegate for the double component picker. And for the action method, all we have to do is be sure to grab the right data to put in the alert. So we need to be able to grab data from both components. So let's put that code in here. And we'll this piece of the code figures out what row is selected in each component by looking at the selected row method, which takes as an argument a component number. So in the single controller picket, the component number was just 0 because there was only the one component. Now we have to specify which component there is, and then we'll look up those strings in the arrays of strings using those indices that we got here, and then we just throw up we can compose our message and throw up an alert with exactly the same code that we used before. So that should be everything. Let's run that and see what it looks like. Great picker. We'll go directly to our double component picker, and it looks like the filling types and the bread types are there, and we can select through them. So our data source and delegate look like they're working, and the alert correctly finds both the filling and the bread type. So that's all working. Not very much more complicated than the single component picker. You just have to be sure that you're passing component numbers when you figure out which rows are selected. So that's that. In this video, I think we can go ahead and do our dependent component picker as well. So let's go to our storyboard, and the drill should be even more familiar at this point. We're going to grab a picker view, put it down here, constrain it. Let's move this up a little bit. Actually, let's see if I can well, I'll just position it there vertically and then center it horizontally. So let's center horizontally, and we'll position vertically at that distance. And we'll add a button now. And I'm going to go back and edit my button names. And The other two view controllers I didn't change them. Let's see, did I get a button added here? It doesn't look like it, but I'll pull up the hierarchical view to make sure. So this is the dependence. Nope, no button yet. Let's put a button there. And we'll pin it to the, we'll center it horizontally and pin it to the top at that distance. So it's properly constrained. We'll change its name. Let's specify again that we're going to use the view controller as the data source and delegate. So I'll control drag. From the picker to the view controller icon. We've set those things now. The other things we need to do are set up again the outlet and action method for the button, outlet for the picker. Let's get the assistant view up, or assistant editor rather, and make sure I've got the right class going. And new action method for the button. We'll call it on button press as we usually do. And an outlet for the picker. Dependent picker. And we're done with the storyboard. Let's go to the view controller. Now, this time there's a bunch of data, not just a few bread types and a few filling types. They've got 50 states and 10,000 some zip codes, I guess up to 100,000. So we're going to load those from a data structure called a plist. P-lists are hierarchically organized name-value pairs that have been around in macOS since long before it was macOS. They're a next step thing. The P stands for property, so it's a list of properties where you've got the name of the property and then the value of the property, and like I said, they can be hierarchically organized. At its core, it's an XML file, but you don't really need to fool with that. But we're going to add one to, there's already one here. The info plist tells you some information about the project, and this is just sort of properties of the project, like what version of the OS and things like that we're doing. We're going to add another one that has the data about the states and their zip codes, and we'll examine that, and we're going to initialize that and use it as our data for to back this picker. So let's grab that from the book source code. And there's a file here called statedictionary.plist. I'm going to grab that and drop it into my project, just down here by info plist. And I want to copy it, so we'll just put it in there. And I can look at it. And I said it's hierarchically organized, so at the top level, the name-value pairs are the name of a state, and the value is an array. So I can open that, and the array has indices, and then the zip codes correspond to each of those indices. And these are all the valid zip codes for Alabama. Start at 35004, go down to 656. So 657 zip codes for state of Alabama. Okay. And you notice there's a built-in plist editor in Xcode. It's actually built into macOS. You can edit plist files. Well, it's part of Xcode, I guess, but plists are around not just in iOS, but in all the Mac products. So that's a convenient way to get data into our picker. So the first, rather than have we'll have some arrays up here, but we're going to populate them when viewDidLoad runs. So let's grab that code from the book source. first of all, the variables we'll need. The state component is going to be 0. The zip code component will be component 1. We'll have the whole thing, state zips, is an array of is a dictionary of arrays of strings, and then we'll have one that's just the states and one that's just the zips for the particular state. So, but we're gonna. It's actually pretty easy to populate those data structures from the P list if it's part of the project. So we'll put that code in view did load, as I said, because we know that that's going to run the first time the project load, this view controller loads. So for now, don't worry about what a bundle is, but it's a form of persistent storage. We specify the URL, which is the file name, statedictionary.plist, and we'll initialize an NS dictionary with that plist as a dictionary of arrays of strings, where the keys in the dictionary are also strings. We can use the keys property of a dictionary to fill in the array of states, and we'll sort them so that they're sorted alphabetically. We'll select the first state. That'll change as we roll through the code, but for now the selected state is 0, and we'll then initialize the zips array, which are the zips for the selected state, by picking out that component from the array of state zips. So again, this is the first element of the array of states. It's a string. So being a string, we can use it to index into a dictionary, and that's going to return an array of strings, which is the right thing to put in zips because zips is an array of strings. Okay, so that initializes our data. We're obviously going to have to do some stuff in the data source and delegate that's a little fancier. So let's put that stuff in there now. Let's go ahead and grab the data source and delegate methods out of the book source code. We'll put it in here. Let's talk about what it does. Number of components is simple. It's 2 because again we've got just states and zip codes. But now we have to tell the number of rows in component. We have to we'll just return based on the component number either the count in states or the count in zips, where again zips is selected based on the current state. So when we change the selected state, we're going to have to change what's in zips as well, and we'll see how that works in the delegate method. If the delegate method's called just with a for a single component, we'll either return the appropriate state or the appropriate zips. If instead what has happened is that a different row has been selected in the state piece, then we have to repopulate zips. So we'll figure out what state has been selected, grab the zips for that, and reload the component and select row 0, the first zip code. We're not going to try to select from the middle of the zip codes or anything. You could do that if you wanted to, but we'll just go ahead and select the first zip code that goes with the state there. And then the last piece here, the states are going to, we want this, you can specify how wide each component would be. In the double component picker, we just let them be the same width, but here the zip codes are narrower than the states, so we're going to let the zips take up 1/3 of the width of the picker, so we'll return that value for their width. And for the state name, we'll use 2/3 the width of the picker. And the width of the picker, you just get as a variable that belongs to the picker view. Okay. So those are our data source and delegate methods. Forgot to implement to make the view controller implementing the data source and delegate. So let's go and put that in up here. Otherwise, that's actually trying to think. I'm going to leave those off, and you can see what error happens if you forget to do that, because it's a common enough error that you're probably going to do it at some point in your code when you're working on the project. So when I compile this and run it and it fails, we'll know to come back in and put in the picker view data source and picker view delegate classes here. We have our outlet there. We don't have an action method, so the action method is actually the last thing we need to implement, and it's pretty straightforward. It just grabs the zip and the state name and zip and makes an alert based on them. So on button press, it figures out which the row of the state and the row of the zip, looks those up in the states and zips arrays, constructs an alert, and presents it. And we're not getting any errors. I think we've implemented everything except for specifying that this view controller implements those other two classes. Let's run it and you'll see what happens. Of course, there may be other errors that I haven't caught, but we know at least there's that error. The date is fine, single component's fine, double component's fine. When we get to the dependent, it crashes because there is no specified and you notice the place it crashes is back in the app delegate. So you can look through the errors here, and it's sort of hard to figure out what's going on. Ultimately, unrecognized selector sent to number of components in picker view. So that's probably your best clue right there, that there's something going wrong with the data source and delegate methods. Actually, it was a delegate method that caused it to crash. So let's put those in. Picker view delegate, picker view data source. Stop this. Oops, I put those in absolutely the wrong place. Those don't go in the app delegate at all. They go in the view controller. Let's rerun. We'll go to our dependent picker. And there are our states. And you can see that the zip codes change when we change which state is selected. And our button seems to be working properly. So that's the dependent component picker view example. That leaves us just the custom example, which is the slot machine game. So we'll do that in the next video.